Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. My name is Lex Frieden. I'll be your host for today's program. I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and I direct the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at Tier Memorial Hermann. We have a great show for you today. In fact, I'm going to ask you a question now, one we'll answer before the end of today's program. What Houston physician treated more people with polio than perhaps any other physician in the United States? We'll get to that before the end of today's program. Right now, we're going to take a break. Come back, I'll introduce our guest. Thank you for being here with us today.
The following program is sponsored by ILRU, Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
This is Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden. Our guest today is Mr. Jack Emmott. Jack, thank you very much for being on the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you, Lex, for asking me to come and talk today.
So, Jack, I've known you for a long time. You're an attorney. You're kind of a philosopher. You're a historian. At this point in our lives, I guess we're both historians. Jack, what do you consider your major occupation today?
Well, it's being a collaborative divorce attorney, but my occupation is very important to serve the needs of other people, to help them through difficult times. But my calling, additionally, is to try to reach out to people and touch them and help them along the journey, the bigger journey in life, which we'll talk about later.
You have obviously use a wheelchair. I know you had polio. I can't relate to that. My neck was broken in a car accident. You were what age when you got polio?
I was 6, and it was 1954, back in the 1900s, Lex. And there was a lot of fear that was similar to what was experienced in COVID. But back in the 1950s and earlier, there was really not a known cause for polio. And so a lot of people did things to take protection, to keep their kids from getting polio, shutting down the pools, making sure you had a mandatory nap in the afternoon, checking the water, which my family did religiously. But there was a flood in August of '54. And I got some of the bio water in my mouth, I suppose. And I found myself 2 weeks after my 6th birthday at Edgecroft Hospital here on Montrose, paralyzed from the neck down. So I know you had paralysis from a sudden event, and I had one that was sudden, but obviously it was a period of about 5 or 6 days, and all of a sudden I couldn't sit, I couldn't walk, I couldn't get on my knees. And instead of going to first grade in the Sapphire School District, I went to Edgecroft Hospital. And I was in isolation, away from my family. And then I was there for about a year.
So it's a year?
Yes.
In isolation?
No, in isolation, probably for 2 weeks.
Okay.
But back then at the hospital, your parents could only visit you for 20 minutes a day, and you didn't have any other visitors. So that was kind of a lonely experience.
So you spent a year in a hospital, 6 years old,
yeah,
just looking at the ceiling.
Yeah, we didn't have a TV. We didn't have a cell phone. I couldn't grab a phone to talk to somebody. And for a long time, my thumbs were not strong enough to even push a button to call a nurse.
Well, now, as I recall back then, most patients were in wards with multiple patients in the same room. Was that the case then?
Yes, I had about 10 patients in my room from me. I think I was the youngest, up to middle-aged people. but it primarily struck the younger people. And the only other downside of me being in the hospital was he used to do spinal taps to check to see whether you had polio or not. Fortunately, my doctor, Sterling, didn't feel like it was necessary. He just looked at me and knew I had polio. But the room where they did the spinal taps was right next door to our ward. So I got to listen to that during the days when they bring other patients in.
Did they anesthetize those patients, or
No.
put them? They didn't put them to sleep before they did a spinal tap.
They just did it.
I cannot imagine.
And I don't know if they put them to sleep now because they do spinal taps now
Right.
for other diseases, but I don't know what the procedure is now. But I know it is not fun and games. It is painful.
Wow.
I've had a lot of pain in my life, just like you, but that was one I missed out on, thankfully.
The time in those, in the nights, as a child, with older adults in the room, all male,
No, they were male and female.
in the same ward.
Yes,
Did you chat among one another?
never.
Did they have respiratory, the big tanks?
Well, what they did is I had what was called a Monahan respirator. And since I was affected in the respiratory area, it looks like a tortoise shell. It's on your front with a strap holding it to you in the back. And it's hooked up to what it looks like a big washing machine or a big vacuum machine. And it'll actually breathe for you. The negative pressure in the chest inside the shell would make your chest cavity raise and lower and give you that breath of life that you need to kind of keep you on life support till your own abilities come back, hopefully. Some people never came back, and they were in the iron lung for basically their whole lives. And other people were like me. It made a level of recovery and a level of function. So the one thing that I can say is with all the help in the polio resources I got and the love just like you, we all have potential no matter what our condition is. And you're the biggest example to me, Lex, of what can happen with what is left. And maybe you've achieved much more in life than you would have achieved if you hadn't had a spinal injury. And maybe in some way, what I lost with polio gave me so much more than I would have otherwise had. I do think I'm a deeper, more well-developed soul because of what I went through. But would I want to go through it again? No. But that's the life I have, and that's the one I'm going to live.
So, Jack, you said one thing a minute ago, that you fortunately had recovered some. I mean, you consider that when you were in the hospital there, you were totally disabled. I mean, you weren't able to move anything?
For a while I was not. But then there was therapies there. One is they would take my clothes off in the morning and wrap me in a hot woolen blanket. That was called the Sister Kenny method. Then after that, I would go down for physical therapy, and they would hook up diodes on my body, or electrodes at certain points, to cause my muscles to jump, to innervate, to keep the muscles alive long enough for the nerves to grow back, or to attach to them what was left. And then I was on a standing bed to keep my bones strong. Then we had aquatic therapy. Then we had play therapy where we worked with ceramics and looms. So it wasn't fun and game, but they did have
You were occupied.
a way to keep me busy.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Well, I want to talk about what happened after that when we come back from this break. We will, Jack, we'll be right back. And I'd like for all of you to stay tuned. We'll be back with Jack Emmott and more Focus on Abilities in just a minute.
There are almost 6 million military and veteran caregivers across the nation. One of the most important elements of caregiving is taking care of yourself.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving for a free military veterans guide to navigate your caregiving journey.
Where did the time go? I don't know how I got
done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
To Sofia and Gabriel. Even though these old knees can't follow on your adventure to the forest today, these flowers represent my love. These stitches and threads join us together. And wherever you see a flower, a bird, a beautiful tree, know that my love is with you.
Make the forest part of your story at a park near you. Find one at discovertheforest.org.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
This is the Lex Frieden Focus on Abilities on HTV. Our guest today is Jack Emmott. And Jack, we talked about how you got in a wheelchair, how you became disabled, but that was how many years ago?
Well, you can do the math. Basically, I'm 74 now.
All right. You were 6 years old then, so you've been around in Houston for a while.
Yes.
Back then, when you got out of the hospital, you're in a wheelchair, your family took you places. Were there places you could not go because you were in a wheelchair?
Yeah, there were plenty of them that you could. Now, when you were light, you know, my dad could drag me up steps or whatever, but basically, you were really limited about where you could go. My parents did a real good job of taking me places that I could get into, public events I could get into. And then we had just the normal experiences you would have doing things as a family, going to church. My mom and dad would, for a while, I was on homebound teaching, where a teacher would come in and teach me 5 days a week at home. And her name was Dorothy Carlton of the Dorothy Carlton Center. And her classroom went from the 9-Bar Ranch up near where the outlet malls are, to Bingle, to Clay Road, all the way north to Champions. And she would actually do the homebound thing. But on Fridays, I would go up to school, and I would attend classes that one day just to keep me involved.
Oh.
And then if I went to, after 5 years, I went to public school full time. And they would build ramps for me to get into the classrooms. But there was nothing such as modified restrooms or anything like that.
But they did build ramps way back in what that would have been the 1960s.
Yeah, but it was like a parent meeting with the principal. And there would be a ramp put in by the back door at the school. It wasn't a wooden ramp. It wasn't any type of mainstreaming.
No, but it was something. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of schools then that didn't do anything,
Yes.
even if the need were expressed to them. So kudos to that principal at the school that decided it was okay to put a wooden ramp on the back door.
You know, that same sentiment, ironically, a month ago I went to the UT Law School with a friend of mine. We're trying to get a scholarship for one of my, for the assistant dean of students at UT Law, Dean Gibson, who's no longer with us. But there was no ramp to get into the law school building in 1972. And Dean Gibson put a ramp there for me, made of concrete. It's very small, but it got me in the front of the school. And here it is, 50 years later almost. I was up there a month ago, and the ramp is still sitting there in the front of the law school. And I joked with Dean Chesky, this ought to be the Jack H. Emmott Memorial Ramp.
It should be.
And he got a big kick out of that.
Yeah, well, next time you go, maybe there'll be a sign on the ramp. Jack, the community really didn't know how to react to people with disabilities in the 1950s and 1960s, even the 1970s. It was, you know, I moved to Houston in 1972, and it was a foreign place. I mean, as you said, couldn't get into restaurants. If you went to the movie, you'd sit in the aisle, and you'd have to sit where you were facing down. The chair was not on the level, and if the fire marshal came by, they'd kick you out of the movie because you're blocking the aisle.
Yes.
The University of Houston was very accessible, however, and that was due to one faculty member who decided to be an interesting experiment to put ramps on the building next to the steps and see whether people chose, regardless of whether they had a need for the ramp per se, which they would choose to walk on. And that was some of the early studies on accessibility. The students, even though they didn't need the ramp per se, used the ramp as much as they did the steps. So that was...
Well, you had the same experience I did probably when you want to go out to dinner in the 60s and the 70s. You would go to a restaurant, there would be no way to get in.
Right. Somebody have to carry you up the steps.
Or go through the kitchen.
The kitchen trip was a good one. Yeah, in fact, there are a couple of restaurants in Houston now which kind of push you toward the kitchen in order to get up on the second floor. We could talk afterwards, Jack.
Yeah.
The accessibility has improved immensely. Now, there's very few places you can't get in a wheelchair that don't accommodate you. And mostly what happens now is that people don't understand the importance of the accessibility. So in a restaurant, they pile the baby chairs in the aisleway to the bathroom, or they stack the beer cases in the hallway to the bathroom, and the space becomes too narrow to drive the wheelchair
That's
through.
happened to me before many times.
Yeah.
And then you'll mention it, they'll move them for you, but it's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
And kind of awkward, for sure.
Well, if you got to go to the bathroom, though, I don't mind being embarrassed a little bit to get there. And they really should understand why those hallways are built the way they were and as wide as they are. One recent example in Houston, a restaurant did a remodeling job, and they hung the door on the men's room backwards. So rather than pushing in to go in, you had to pull out to go in, and made it very difficult to get in for people who were trying to help themselves.
Well, when I was at UT, I was head of the Disabled Students Organization, and it was called MIGHT. It was Mobility Impaired Grappling Hurdles Together. Yeah. And we surveyed every building on the UT campus. And remarkably, we found a very curious thing. There was one building that was had the modified restrooms, the fountains, the doors, but there were a flight of stairs going up to the front of the building. It was completely barrier-free inside if you get into it. And, you know, obviously they did not have anyone that was disabled on the planning committee. Yeah. And it was an embarrassment and oversight that was corrected very quickly.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you need to have some seamless oversight.
But you know, that speaks to one of the issues that we work on all the time, and that is, if you see something, say something. And so many people see errors in accessibility, and they don't mention to anybody, and they don't get it fixed that way. And I think it's not incumbent entirely on those of us who need it. I think other people who see, well, this doesn't make sense, ought to say that.
Well, the great thing about it is if a building's accessible for the disabled, they're accessible for the non-disabled.
Exactly.
And I know that I went to a Starbucks in San Francisco 3 or 4 years ago, and they had the sensor you could wave at to open the door, but they also had one that you could wave your foot in front of.
Oh, cool.
So if you were if you weren't mobility impaired, you couldn't move your arms, you weren't strong enough, you can wave your foot, or I could get in front of there and turn my chair one way or the other.
Good on them.
And activate. And then even in an employment now, Lex, you see so many things, like in our law firm at Gray Reed.
Yeah.
We have sensors on our doors to go in and out, bathrooms that are modified. And when I was a baby lawyer, I'm sure I wasn't hired by a few law firms because they didn't know how I was going to get around,
Yeah.
what kind of burden I was going to be, how would I be able to perform.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Jack, I want to come back and talk more about where we're going in the future, but we are going to take another break. I thank all of you for watching. This is Focus on Abilities. We'll be right back.
Metro is here for you every day, providing safe, reliable travel options. We take you to celebrations and help during emergencies. We're always listening to the community, and we manage taxpayer dollars responsibly. And thanks to overwhelming voter approval, we're building transit for today and tomorrow so that you can drive less and do more.
Hi, you're watching Focus on Abilities. Jack Emmett's our guest today, and Jack has spent a lot of time thinking about disability over the last many decades that he has been a person with a disability. For many of us, we have to live our lives with our disabilities and learn to cope. And Jack, you've had a lot of reflections on what hardships you've faced, challenges you've faced. Must have been very frustrating at times.
Well, it was, at first when something happens like that, you're completely bewildered and confused. And you just don't know where you are, where you're going to go, what happened to you. But after a while, you recognize that things aren't going to change. The only thing that can change is you and how you deal and accept with what you have. And so instead of being a victim, you're not a victim, never have been, I've never have been. But instead of feeling like something's been done wrong to you, it's better to say, what can I learn from this? I've got some gifts. I'll never be able to run, to jump, play golf, do those things I'd love to do. But what I do is I have some other gifts that God gave me. And then my challenge is to develop those to the extent I can. And the things that really cause the things to be developed is clearly hard work, but it's also hope. It's the belief that we can make a difference and that we can inspire others in our achievements, and we can serve as a role model to others of what you can do to overcome your losses.
I used to run when I was at play till polio got in my way. And it took me from home, but made the trip okay.
And I've always felt that in my work, in all areas of my life, it's like, what are the lessons that I've learned, that I haven't lost, I've learned, and how can I rise up from this and do something to help other people?
So, Jack, I mean, those are, that has kind of a spiritual feel to it, and it very moving, and I think a challenge to other people to follow your lead on that. But I know there are a lot of people who sort of feel like everything's lined up against them, and despite their best efforts, they wind up hitting a wall.
Yes.
I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we aren't alone in this. That we have family and friends, and sometimes we need to depend and rely on those family and friends.
We need to rely on them, and you know, I was kind of lucky because if God picked out a mother for a child with a disability with polio, I got the best. And so I think that what really you would like to get cured from a spinal injury, I would like to get cured from polio. But really what got me is I got healed instead. And so I'm as whole as I can be inside, even though outside I'm clearly not.
Well, you've raised an interesting issue. Somebody did ask me, you know, if you could get healed, would you do it? At this point, I'm not sure I would, because I've spent the last 50 years learning how to live in a wheelchair with the condition that I have, and I'm getting to the point where I'm not sure I want to start over again learning the different tricks. So it's not as simple and as good as it might seem when it comes to that sort of discussion. I mean, I think people do adapt to their circumstances if they do as you say, and that is treat their experiences as a lesson. Learn from them, try to adapt, and try to be better, grow, and cope to the extent that we have the capability of doing that, and use the services, the counseling, the goodwill, and the community support that's available.
And we need as much of that and more than we really have.
Yeah.
You know, I did for a while volunteering at TIER, and I got a lot of kick out of wearing a volunteer uniform. And I would actually meet with patients that have gotten spinal cord injuries. I remember one person that broke his neck on his last game in his senior year, and he was going to go to college. And for weeks after weeks, I'd go out and visit with him, but he never asked me what my profession was. And he was so eloquent, I said, you know what, Guy, you need to be an attorney. And he looked at me and said, nobody would hire me because of, you know, I'm disabled. I can't stand up in front of the judge in court and so forth. So I just kind of played along with it. And at the end of our conversation, he said, well, what is your occupation? And I told him, you should have seen the look on his face.
He thought about that twice, didn't he?
So I think that's one of the unique things at TIER, that we have so many people that work there. It shows what you can, but we need to do more.
Jack, you raised you brought me to the answer of the question that I asked at the beginning of the program, and that is what physician in Houston probably treated more patients with polio than any other physician in the United States. And we were so lucky to have this Spanish-born, educated physician. You name him.
Yeah, his name is Carlos Valbona.
Carlos Valbona was here in Houston in the 1950s and treated patients at the Southwest Poliomyelitis Center before TIER Memorial Hermann began to treat the polio patients. And throughout his life, he's passed now, but throughout his life, there wasn't a better advocate or friend for people with disabilities than Carlos Valbona.
He saved my life at least twice.
Well, there's a thumbs up to him. Jack, thank you for being on our show today.
And thank you for having me. It's been delightful.
It's been a pleasure.
Keep up the good work, Lex.
Appreciate it. I want to thank all of you for watching Focus on Abilities. This is a program produced by HTV, and we are more than privileged to have the opportunity to meet with you via this means. Thank you again for watching. Join us next time for more Focus on Abilities.
It's been grand, you see.